so happy you decided to like come on and talk with us, because it's just, you know, I mean, I know we laughed about the big giant pelvis, and I'm like, I was wondering where I got that, you know, because it is just like so many things that you taught me are just like living in me. And I'm like, well, you have to come on, because you're one of like the most brilliant teachers I've ever met in my life. So like, I'm so glad you're here to just go through all those, like how you learned all those things, and how I think what's also really special about you is how you've incorporated all of those, like all the teachings and all the reading that you've done, and like how you're able to bring that into like an actual like lesson, because that's also what's so, there's so much information to like share and like tell people, and that you're able to do that and deliver that in like 45 minutes is a real gift.
Reading the books, and forward and back in editing, and that's really how I started. Is I started by editing Charles's books when, you know, he had English as a second language. So he started out with Creative Horsemanship, and he wanted to re-edition it. And he started out, his second book was Dressage Questions Answered. And then when it went out of print, he wanted to redo it. And, you know, I knew what he wanted to say, but because I'd listened to his lectures, but there were missing pieces. You know, so I went back to him and I said, you know, you really need to write this chapter in here, or write this connecting piece between this chapter and that train of thought, like you did in that lecture, you know, and so I was sort of assigning him, kind of like what an editor would do. I was assigning him like, this could be a better book if you would just, you know, connect chapter 3 and chapter 4 with this connecting piece. So I got my start kind of knowing what he meant to say, but it wasn't really on the page. And being kind of an interpreter, and as you know, with the clinics, he had limited time and a lot of demand. So he would like go to Wisconsin and go there maybe twice a year. So, well, just start, well, in 1983, Charles asked me to go to Napa Valley, which was it was a month-long course, this first horsemanship course that he taught. It was a month-long, it was Monday through Friday, 9 to 4, with a lecture at lunch, and we had like 16 riders. So we had 2 teachers. I was the assistant teacher. I warmed everybody up, and then they went from my arena and they had a little 5 or 10 minute walk to his arena, and then they had their lesson with him. And we had lunging in the morning, and then we would have some kind of group activity in the afternoon. So it would be cavaletti, it would be some kind of diversification. We'd do like cross country, we'd go maybe on the polo field, we'd go on the track, we would go like on a real trail ride showing how to go up and down hills. We would do carousel, we would do switching horses, formation ride. So there were a lot of different things. Anyways, we had this very, very long drive from where we were staying to Napa. It was an 1.5-hour drive every single day. So that's when I really picked Charles' brain in 1983. I was like, okay, well, Charles, what am I supposed to say at lunch during my lecture? And so I would kind of rehearse it with him. And mainly his main advice to me was don't be too long-winded, you know, which I still haven't learned. Like,
me neither.
Yeah. Try to be short and succinct and get it over with in 25 minutes. Like, I can't say anything.
I can't either.
It's like another thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, but what he said, don't worry about it. If questions come up in your lessons and, you know, riders ask you, you know, how can I get my horse more engaged? Or, you know, tell me the aids for a half pass, or how do I prep my horse for flying changes? He just said, if you don't know the answer, just tell them you'll get back to them, and then ask me in the car on the way home, and I'll talk to you about it. So, you know, like back and forth is like 40 trips, and that's the beginning of it. But then, you know, I did these courses with him for like 17 years. So we did these courses all over the country. They weren't always a month. Sometimes they were a week. Sometimes they were 5 days. And then he had, as you know, oversubscription in places like Wisconsin, where he could go maybe twice a year. Yep. And he need to follow up like to your barn and come. Yep. And your mom and you and your partner wanted, you know, clinics every 2 months or, you know, every 6 weeks. So I would go.
Yeah. And that happened with Gail at Liberty, as well as with Greta at Wingate. I mean, it was like, we could not get enough of you guys. You had to come all the time.
You at Wingate, you had like 10 clinics a year, and the only months that didn't have clinics were like, you know, Christmas and like the hot month where people were showing, like August or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Stefan was going there as well. But it was really good because the riders really progressed, because you guys were teaching them in the meantime, keeping them going. But they also had questions, and they heard it different ways. Mm-hmm. And that model actually happened in like Ohio and in Florida, and it actually worked really, really well. When you know, every teacher brings something different to the table, or they say it slightly differently, or sometimes the student hears it like from 4 different people, and then they're finally convinced, you know. So for me, over the last 12 years, having Xenophon Press and being in a remote area, and having had a lot of lessons and a lot of from really great horses and really good instructors, having to delve into and edit books, which I started with Charles, editing his books, and reading them forwards and reading them backwards. And many of the books that I edited were written by people who had English as a second language. So they, you know, it was either a Portuguese author that was like getting their book translated, or they could teach a writing lesson in English, but they couldn't necessarily write it really well. So because English is the first language for me, but I know what they meant, and I have a background in languages, I was pretty good at smoothing out that language and making it sort of readable by who I call Mary Ellen. You know, Mary, you know, the English as a first language. Well, we both know who Mary Ellen is, you know, in Wisconsin, you know, from Green Bay, Wisconsin. She's always
I know. I'm like, there's actually a real Mary Ellen.
Yeah, there is. She's blushing now, you know.
Hey, Mary Ellen.
Hey. It's really, you know. So, I just found that I love that, and I always admired J.A. Allen and publishers that did great works. And then when their works were kind of going out of print, and then when unfortunately he passed, I was noticing the works were going out of print. And Ivan Bezagloff, who I'd met at the World Equestrian Games in 1986, it was still the World Dressage Championships at Cedar Valley. That was actually the last World Dressage Championships, when it was not yet the WEG. They just had yeah. And I met him there. Well, I'd met him in LA in '84, and he was sitting around with Charles and HLM Van Schaik, and, you know, in the bleachers complaining, you know, about riders. And I was sitting there, you know, in my sun umbrella, you know, and, you know, but they made an impression on me. And, you know, years later, I was buying his books for my students and wanting them to read them, really wanting them to, here's Gymnasium of the Horse, you really need to read this. And then I was ordering them, and he was slowing down on delivering the orders. And so I told him, you know, I hope you're okay, because, you know, I don't want these books to go out of print. If you need any help, let me know. And eventually he said, you know, if you want to take over the press, I'd like you to buy it, you know, and do it quickly. So it happened very quickly. But
well, we are so glad that you did that, because those great works, I mean, you've single-handedly kept it alive, you know? I mean, that is, I was just thinking about like what a incredible contribution that is, that you like have always been a reader and really brilliant in your understanding, but then to like serve the public in that way, to like make sure that it could have just easily been just, you know, sold, and or, you know, he just kept it and like nothing happened to it after that. So that's just like the magnitude of that just really hit me, of like, wow, like some of the, without you, you know, taking control of it, like who knows what would have happened.
Yeah, well, there have been, you know, there have been presses that I've seen, like at least 3 that have kind of disappeared in the last 10 years, or they're just not what they were. Some that I really admired. But I think the reason it was is like I came from, you know, Canada, and kind of what I call like the middle of nowhere Canada in British Columbia, where we were like really interested in dressage, and we had like in the 70s dressage and hack shows, you know, where we had dressage, hack, and then we had the dressage tests. So people were really passionate about it, but they didn't know anything about it really. And so it's not like we were steeped in this culture, like we had come from Aachen and everybody knew, you know, if we grow up in the town of Aachen, you know, everybody knows what a shoulder in is, and everybody knows what horses round and on the bit. So I think that's where the thirst for the knowledge is. I felt like there's so many people in remote areas that maybe don't have access to like and that's what Charles's kind of plea was for so long, was to have some kind of academy, some US academy, that we need to have academies and institutions but now we have to have virtual academies. So, and he always said that, you know, dressage is only alive as well as it lives on in its current day practitioners. You know, who the people who actually go out and practice it today in their backyard or in their manege or in their training center. That's as good as it is as we restart it today. And so when we came to our middle of nowhere Franktown, you know, and there was no other people here, I said to my wife, I'm like, Tag, you're my teacher now. And blanched, and she said, well, you're my teacher. And I said, well, I know I have been. And I said, yes, but you are my teacher. And we both really ended up maturing as when we moved here, because we realized how much we actually knew. And we used to live in the same town as Charles, you know, and I did or, you know, a couple towns over for a very, very long time. So it was like, hey, I'll just call him up on the phone, you know, or I'll just get another lesson. And then it became not that easy. So the books help with the theory. And I feel like as a teacher, I became a much more relaxed teacher with that knowledge, with the book knowledge. You can't really learn to ride from a book, but you can get your theoretical grounding that then gives you the ease with which to answer questions, even if you can't remember what book you read. If it becomes part of you. That's why I really like the fact that you were saying, you know, I was sort of smiling when you were saying, you know, the world.
My big giant pelvis. Yeah.
Big giant.
And you're like, I said that. Yeah. And it's just, that was a beautiful way to say what you just said about the books. Yeah. And that it is true. Like, yeah, you can't read it and then right away go and apply it in a kinesthetic way. But that just that deeper understanding. And I do feel like even just learning to become a teacher helps that also. Like all of a sudden you have to describe it to someone and go through like the action plan, how to attain it. And like that book knowledge is, yeah, really helpful in that knowing the real science of it. You know, I mean, that's what you and Charles really instilled in me so much, was it isn't just like you're a good writer, you know, it's like there's a real way of doing things, and there's a right way and a wrong way, and we have to respect that and keep that alive. Just like you're saying, like the daily practitioners are what keeps, you know, the art alive. And it's really fun to talk to you about like how you're keeping it alive with keeping these books out there, because I feel like one of my roles is to keep it alive by competing, you know, that it's like it's relevant to any horse today, you know, or the sport, you know, the art versus the sport, you know, that it's like it does help the horses become better, you know. And it's like really fun to just think about the influence of all those books that are just, you know, and then how you've incorporated that into your brilliant teaching as well. You know, that's, you really feel that when you ride with you, that there's just this vast knowledge. And you can actually quote the books. Like, clearly I don't remember where I learned everything, but like, I remember you just like, you know it so well that you're like, well, you know, Von Schaik says this, you know, and then you can relate it to how Charles said it because you've edited all of his books, you know. So then that was like, oh, when that was fun. I was just doing a lecture on the seat for the Academy and going through Steinbrecht and then, you know, a couple different books and Charles's books and everything I learned from you. And it was like, everyone is saying so much of the same thing in a little bit different way, or, you know, it's just really fun to see that common thread through those books, that, you know, there is a real systematic way to train horses that has worked for hundreds of years, you know.
I had a teacher when I was a teenager named Rex Rhodes, and he used to have Podolsky's Complete Training of Horse and Rider. And he used no microphone. He just bellowed, you know, from center. And he had a, you know, one of those swivel riding seats, the old English type that was kind of a walking stick that you just
yes, yes.
And you sat in the middle, and he swiveled around and kind of did this. And he holler, you know, Podolsky says on page 68, and he would, you know, it was. And then I realized I was listening to myself teaching, which I used to hate to hear my own videos. And I would say, well, before I met Charles in 1977, all these people at the barn were going, well, Charles says this and Charles says that. And Charles says we're supposed to do this. Well, no, Charles says that. And I'm like, who is this Charles person? I'm like, who is that? I mean, why are they quoting this person? I'm like, I didn't get it. And then they're like, oh, we want you to ride for Charles in the lunch break to audition to see if you're good enough to ride with him next time in September. So I had to like audition in June to see if I was okay to pass muster. So I had to audition back then to be permitted to ride, you know, 3 months later. So he let me ride, you know, 3 months. He's like, yes, you can let him in the next time.
Yeah, and like the rest is history. Like that's a great story. Yeah, I mean.
But even in my own teaching, I would say, you know, Jula says, or, you know, Charles says, or Steinbreck says. And then I said, okay, if we got the rider riding down the long wall between R and M, you know, and then I about 5 years ago, I just took that off. I just gave the information, but it's not like, oh, this is now, well, it is my knowledge, but to be more efficient with the delivery, I just say it.
Yeah.
And you know, you're taking the lesson from me, so evidently you would trust me, you know, and I don't have to justify through my resume of like, well, this came from Charles, and that came from Arthur Kotis, and this came from Jula Dalosh, and, you know, or I read this in a book. It's just like, okay, this is just my understanding of it, you know, as it is. And eventually comes that melting pot where it's all the books and all the teachers. And the other thing that we haven't mentioned, which is, you know, to me, the greatest teachers of all are the horses, especially the untrained ones, you know, the ones that actually know nothing, like the 3.5-year-old. He's going to teach you way more than the schoolmaster, because the first thing he's going to teach you is to survive. You know, like, and don't piss him off. And to be a diplomat, and to ask quietly, and, you know, incrementally, you know, and still figure out a way. So, and I'm riding a young stallion now, and, you know, who was very, very opinionated, and didn't, you know, had maybe 22 rides on him when I started, and extremely exuberant. And, you know, he's every horse, I think, oh my God, this is, you know, this is the new schoolmaster, the greatest schoolmaster. So I'm so grateful for every horse that I ever got to ride. I'm a good riding teacher. To me, a great riding teacher teaches the rider how to learn from the horse, and basically teaches themselves out of a job. If we really do a good job as a riding teacher, we teach the rider now how to learn from the horse, so they don't need us anymore. If we've really done an awesome job, and then we can become maybe like a coach. And that's really the mark of when we've actually done a job of being a great riding instructor. When we say the best teacher here is your untrained little quarter horse, your 5-year-old quarter horse that's sort of stumbling around over the cavalettis. That's the professor. And I think people miss that, you know, they think that you are their teacher, or they think that I'm teacher, or I think that Charles is their teacher, and actually they have to teach themselves how to ride. And that's what I always try to tell people, is like, I'm instructing you how to teach yourself how to ride and to learn from your horse.
I love that. And I sometimes call myself, I'm just the translator here, like helping you interpret what your horse is telling you, and then giving you some ways to think about it to change what's happening, you know, or like instill a little tiny change. But I love how you put that, and I could not agree more. And that's hard to do. I mean, there's so many things, there's so much information to get out there, you know, but I love that, like, the number one thing is like, learn to interpret what your horse is telling you about yourself, like not only about your aid, but also about your character, because that's a big lesson that they, you know, whether it's patience or discipline or consistency or concentration, you know, all those things is also evident on a daily way.
Well, and the first thing that we have to do when we like meet the horse in the stall, the first thing that we have to do is we have to kind of like listen. You know, we like, okay, how is he or she? How is he today? Is he droopy? Is he excited? Is he agitated? Is he nervous? Is he phlegmatic? Is he jumpy? You know, is he super reactive? Is he, you know, what is he? Or is he affectionate? Is he loving? You know, and they come to us differently as an emotional, sentient creatures every day. I think we have to be open to that difference, because I really noticed that, like with this PRE that I have, he's different every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really, like there's a big difference, and I have to really pay attention. And if I rush the brushing and I don't do the caressing and I don't do the like rubbing the nose and doing the nostrils and making the connection, you know, people talk about like, I have a really good connection with my horse, and they're talking about rain contact. It's like, well, did you actually make a connection? Did your hands actually physically touch his body? Did you take that time and really, not necessarily hug and kiss him, but did you actually like feel his vibration come back to you and make that connection? Because the weird thing is, when two horses are standing in a paddock together, that's what they do. One puts their mouth on the other one's wither, and they're like, hey, you know, you scratch my withers, I'll scratch yours, you know, or you swat my flies, I'll swat yours. And so to me, to be a good horse person, you become horse-like, not people-like. You know, you have to be like really weird, and you have to be like a horse. You got to be like a horse. So people aren't horse people think that you're weird. So it's a good thing if people think that we're weird. You know, non-horse people are weird.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. I actually just had this conversation, the lesson I was teaching right before this call, because Wednesday she had this wonderful ride. You know, he's in 4th level, like we were cresting on Pre-St. George. And then today it's very hot, and he's really phlegmatic today and kind of down, and just kind of like had a day off yesterday. So like he didn't bring it. And we just had this conversation about like how to meet the horse where the horse is at, because you want to, you know, when you start to make progress, it's really easy to be like, oh, I can't wait to like go what just happened yesterday, or I had such a good ride on Wednesday, I can't wait to repeat that. And that's like a sure sign that the horse is going to be like totally different, and you're going to have to like adjust to that and meet that horse where he's at that day, and then bring him to a level where you can, you know. But it's so, you have to really come from his perspective and point of view. I love that. And thinking about, how horses communicate with each other, you know, is a big thing. I'll never forget all these things that you, like every time I get on the mounting block, I always think of you, because all my horses, like my reins are short, they're on the bit, and then I get on, you know, because it's just like, that also like sets that tone, and that's actually also safety, you know. And like, I will never forget that. I mean, there's many things, you know, we did so many clinics together, and, you know, you coached me, you know, young riders. And even then after like the coaching at the horse shows, then as I became a better teacher, then watching you teach my students, it's just been like so fun to think back on that time, and you know, how wonderful that this relationship is, you know. I feel like I need more Richard in my life.
Well, the other thing, you know, we shared which was really fun, I thought, is we rode some of the same horses. Like, I think you rode in Hungary, right? You rode Holly, right? Didn't you ride Holly?
Only every now and again. But I knew him, you know, so that's a really fun shared history. Yeah.
And then I think when Will was over there, you were back in Wisconsin. You're like, oh, if you're over there, just take your lessons on Will, you know. Did. And then I think we had, when Jula came over, and to Wingate and
and Ohio,
yeah,
also
and,
in Ohio.
yeah, and we had Donovan, you know, the horse.
And Will, and Makti, one of my younger horses.
Yeah, and that's a lot of fun. And there was a son of Actaeon. I don't remember. He was kind of like a roan.
Yes, he was pink.
Yeah.
Yeah, Christian owned him. Yes.
Yeah. And they're like, hey, Richard, long legs. And this is at the Tattersall. And they're like, we want you to get on this thing, you know, and I'd never ridden it. And they're like, just sit there and, you know, ask him for a little bit piaffe. It wasn't even a lesson. It wasn't even in the arena. It was kind of like on one of those, you know, 12-foot wide, you know, sandy walkways between the arenas. And they're like, this, you know, and they're like snapping their fingers like this. They're going, and they're like, and Jules, oh, Najanyo, Richard. Very good. What? Very good. This piaffe. I'm like, what piaffe? The thing was like so smooth. It was like sitting on an Italian sofa. It was like so mushy. And he's like, oh, we had no idea he could do this piaffe like this. It's because I had these long legs, you know. So, but we have some of those good memories, you know.
Yeah, and it's so fun, like going through these videos for the Team Tate Academy. You know, it's like Eula always puts his finger up, and he would always be like, Jessica, more whatever, like control or activity or, you know.
He would say, Richard, just down seat.
Yeah. The down seat. I mean, I'm like,
okay.
Like now I get that.
Up seat, you know. and together.
And look at out. Like out where? Where are we looking? Yeah. It's so funny. Yeah. But it totally made sense. I mean, because you just like tried all these different things and often he'd be like, yes, you know, better. And you're like, okay, that's the down part, you know, more push with hip.
In corner. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my God, that was so wonderful.
Yeah. I feel like I taught him English, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
At least you tried to learn Hungarian, but I would sit there at the side of the, I would sit there in the afternoons with a notebook when he taught well, they weren't all teenagers, but they were teenage girls and some young ladies.
Yep.
You know, have them 6 or 7 of them spread out in the arena. And they'd all be doing something, and he would be like, Kishker, you know, ish tepish, ish ugetish. And so, like, okay, then I'm doing everything phonetically. And then this means small circle. This means means cancer.
Right. I in the group lessons, I always laugh because I'm like, I really got to know quick the difference of Atlovaltash and Altvaltash. You know, one was change direction on a half circle and one was change direction on the diagonal. And I'm like, you know, going wherever. Yeah, I'm doing my small circle and I'm like, oh, nope, that was not, oh, this was a diagonal. Okay. Yeah. It was like, whew, a quick lesson in languages, but that was a great time.
I remember we went to try out a horse in November in the indoor there at the Tattersall with my friend Julie. It was for sale and she was looking for a client. I can't remember whether she bought it or not for a client, but and they had all the jumpers in there and, you know, they the lines in off the wall and they were just bombing, you know, no helmet, boom, boom, going diagonals and lines. And he's Richard, inside track, off the wall, 2 tempi chain, you know. And I'm like, where? Oh, right here. And then good, good. Oh, then the 3 tempi, you know, then whatever it was. And then, horse perfect for you, Richard, I think, you know. And then he said, any questions? Yeah, after 45 minutes of nearly being dive bombed, you know. And so Charles was interpreting, and his English wasn't very good. I mean, Jula's was not very good. So he asked Charles, he said, ask Richard if he has any questions. And I said, I only have one question. What are the rules of the road in the arena here in Hungary? Like, you know, ask him, is it left to left? Because, you know, I didn't notice really a pattern. And he just got this, he looked down at the ground, and he had this giant smile on his face, and he said one word in Hungarian, which you probably know what it is. And then Charles just bust out laughing. And then I'm like, well, what did he say? And he's like, survive. Just survive. There's no rule. You just don't get hit, and you don't get run over.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Oh, such great times.
Yeah. Probably rambling, but
that was great. That was fun. Yeah.
So
I mean,
how are you doing your teaching now with the new climate?
well, we hustled to you know, Catherine and I, and Charles too. I mean, Charles has always been, you know, as you know, more than anybody, that he's always like, you know, we need to get an academy. That's the only way to really train people. And, you know, I've always thought about, you know, how do you do that in the United States? So big. And do you create like a bunkhouse, and do you create classrooms, and who has the horses, and like, you know, how do you do it? And so when the coronavirus hit, you know, Catherine's like a computer whiz, and we just started talking, and I had said to my husband Richard, I'm like, grab a video camera or grab the phone, and I'm just gonna start writing. And I just got inspired, and I'm like, I'm just gonna start talking while I'm riding, and I want you to just videotape it. We'll put the mic into the phone, because a lot of times when I go teach clinics, you know, people want you to ride the horse, and people have found it really helpful when you can like talk through what you're doing. And so I thought, well, I could do that. I mean, that's really easy to just describe what I'm doing, the exercise, you know, taking all those great exercise and giving people like a visual medium to look at while they can hear me talk about, you know, kind of bring the books to life in a way. Like, what is a shoulder in? Why would you do it? When do you start it? How do you sit? What's good? What's not great? What's normally going to happen? How do you fix that? So I just started riding around with a microphone, and we got these videos together. And then Catherine and I just talked about, like, we should just make the academy. Like, we just need to start, you know? So it's been wonderful. And, you know, being at home with the virus, you know, it just got me really a little bit introspective and grounded me in a way that felt really good. And, you know, how to reach more people without being able to travel, you know? So then it just went online. So we've been really thrilled with, you know, the popularity and what people are gaining from it. And, you know, I still, you know, can't wait to teach everyone in person, you know, but it's been amazing to even, you know, figure out what Zoom is. Like, even this, like, it's so great to see you. And it's like, I didn't even know what Zoom was like 5 months ago, you know. It's just kind of adapting to the time. And we had a conversation with Charles yesterday, and I said, in some ways it's kind of sad to think about, like, the way the academy I always envisioned, like, probably wouldn't happen, with like bunkhouses and lots of horses, and very much what you guys created for me and my growing up, that we would, you know, do the lunging in the morning, and it was like 5 days of intense work and group rides and lectures. And, you know, that, you know, it was kind of sad to let go of that idea that wasn't going to happen necessarily at least in the near future. And so then it kind of also liberated our idea to be like, we can make this academy online however we want, you know, and incorporate, you know, guest lectures and guest teachers. And like the internet's just kind of, in some ways, at first I was sad, and it's like, you know, this coronavirus is changing everything. And then it was like to adapt and kind of go with it. Now I feel really liberated to be like, how to incorporate all these great ideas, you know, of like you being able to share things with us and Charles being able to remotely be a part of it too. It kind of became really exciting. So we've been thrilled with it. And it's been a lot of fun, actually, and kind of like revived me. It's been really exciting. Now they're like, oh, you can go to the shows. And I'm like, oh, like, do we have to go to the show? You know, it's been so fun to just like be home and find a greater depth in the training. So that's been really fun, actually.
Yeah, that's cool. It's kind of like the necessity, you know, the mother of invention.
Yeah,
You know,
100%.
it's a good thing.
Yeah, so I'm sure you'll be getting some invitations once we figure out like how to incorporate all of my great teachers. I'm sure we're gonna have you on the schedule somehow, some way.
Well, I think the whole Zoom thing, you know, that was always the thing, like to fly around the country and stay in a hotel and lose the day of travel and, you know, stay in a hotel and be on an airplane. Is like, well, what do we really need to do? What we really need to do is we really need to just see the rider in front of us, and they need to really tune in and hear us. So as the technology improves, I think this is just a catalyst for pushing that technology to better and better tools, so that we could say, okay, well, I'm having, you know, I really want to have you know, lessons with Jula. I want him to, like, you know, see what I'm doing now, and I want, but to get myself on a plane and to have somebody house sit and horse sit here and leave everything here becomes just like
impossible.
Logistically, not even cost-wise, it's just logistically, as you build your life, it gets more and more complex. But if you say, hey, we could just make an appointment, and then, you know, that'd be totally cool if that could happen.
Yeah, I keep, every time we talked to Charles last night and now talking to you, just like gets my wheels turning of like, I mean, there's such great information, you know, and I just feel so honored and grateful to have had such a wonderful teacher like you in my life. And still, there's still so much to learn, you know, and it's just, I feel this like real passion of like, to be the vehicle to get it out there, you know, that it's just this platform that is needed at the time. And it's like, okay, now how do we share it with everyone, you know, because there is a way to do it. It's just kind of figuring out. I mean, we've talked about creating a instructor category, you know, of like, how do we train the trainers or teach the teachers? You know, it's a whole nother thing to be like, train the horse, and why are we doing the things we're doing, but then also how to train the instructor to train the lady to train the horse, you know. It's just like so many levels that I just think, you know, the ideas are endless. So it's going to be really fun to brainstorm that.
Training the teachers is something I've done, you know, quite a bit, but you know, also being in a remote area where we wanted to have our own property, so we wanted it to be affordable, and we wanted to raise our kids in the country. So, you know, we're not a metropolitan area, but the training the teachers is really, really important, because that's, not everybody has the skill to be a good teacher, but the ones who have a passion for it should have that access, you know, and they should be cultivated, because that's how it's going to get passed on.
Yeah,
you know?
100%.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's really important between teachers or professionals like us is that we don't necessarily have a hierarchy, that we just have, that we are free and to stimulate one another, just have to have the dialogue.
Totally.
To just like, oh, well, that thing that I had totally forgotten about, that thing that you just reminded me of, and like that totally inspired me, because often we're talking to the student who is really absorbing a lot of, you know, we're trying to absorb a lot of what we're saying, but we also as teachers have to get fed. You know, we need to be, we have to have our creative juices restored and stimulated by conversations with other professionals. And I think, you know, having a culture between professionals that is collegial, you know, is really, really important, and where it's not competitive,
right.
You know, and not, and there's a lot of, you know, where there in the past, there was a lot of, you know, well, if you ever take a lesson from so-and-so, I'll never speak to you again. And I never ever did that. I'm like, you know, I just said to people, you know, ask yourself, to whom are you listening and what qualifies them to teach you? And if you've really done your research and you've checked out their credentials and you've gone and audited ahead of time, then and you're pretty sure of what you're getting and it seems like a good fit, then go for it, you know. But I think teachers need to support one another more, you know, and work together, and not think that there's some kind of pyramid, like so-and-so is above so-and-so and so-and-so is below so-and-so. It's just like, you know, people, nobody really gets up in the morning and says, well, I'm going to do a really bad job today. I mean, everybody actually, I believe, is trying to do a good job, you know. They're really with the best of their information that they have available to them.
I love that. Yeah,
you know.
and I do think, like, just again, part of the academy was like creating like-mindedness, not only between the students, but also like their teachers. And yeah, like to create some type of that same, like, and I, you know, we always say like, who's ever in the saddle is the trainer, you know, but that there is this like-minded mutual respect of finding inspiration amongst each other, I think is a huge thing. And not always so easy in some areas, for sure. So I'd like to help facilitate that change of culture, you know, as well, that everyone has something interesting, like to add to it. Like even just, you know, always talking to you, there's not even a horse here, you know, but it's like, I love that idea of like, you know, Charles would always say, you know, your job is to mute the teacher, you know, and I loved it today when you were like, the job is that your student doesn't need you anymore because you taught them how to listen to the horse. Like, I love that. And that's like, even just today, that's inspiring to me, you know, that it's like, I'm going to go teach a lesson now. And it's like, I love that, you know, because like, what are you giving people and passing on to them, you know, is really fun to collaborate on those ideas.
Well, he would come out to, you know, I'd be like, well, I really need help with Lendorf, you know, and could you give me a lesson? He's like, well, I've talked all day, and, you know, in his 40-minute lessons or 38.9-minute lesson.
Yeah. I still can't do that.
Me neither. My 45-minute lessons are sort of hour-ish, you know.
I hear you.
They're 45 minutes with the 15-minute break, which I don't take. but anyways, so I would set him up with the speaker plugged into the cigarette lighter, put on top of the car, set him up, Colt. He'd have the gloves, and like I'd be riding around, and then I'm like, after 15 minutes, I'm like, you haven't said anything. Is the speaker working? Yes, it's working. Just keep going. And then another 15 minutes go by, and then I'm like, okay, is there anything else you want to say? Not saying. And then it was just like, I'll tell you on the drive home.
Oh.
Okay. Like, you have to pick me up. You gotta, after my clinic, you gotta pick me up, take me to the arena, take me back. He wasn't gonna drive anywhere. And he's like, I'm seeing I want to be the fly on the wall to see what you would do if I didn't say anything. But, so he was training me to not need him.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, the other, because he was like, I'm mentoring you to be a teacher. And that's that was my measure. Our measure when we went to the academy, when he was in Hungary in the academy, is like, we knew we had the best day if we never got spoken to riding for 8 hours and our teachers never said a word to us. Mm-hmm. They didn't interrupt. They didn't give us any advice. Then we knew it was like an awesome, awesome day. When we didn't get any advice from them, then we knew we were doing our job.
Yeah.
And, try to sell that to, somebody who wants to have 45-minute lesson,
right.
And they're paying for information. So, I knew, because I had heard his story. Mm-hmm. It's like, there's silence. And, in other words, he wanted me to be thinking during that 45 minutes. He wanted me to thinking, what really must I be doing here? Not relying on him to do the thinking for me.
Right.
Like,
right.
if I
yeah.
get told off, if I don't want to get told off and lectured and finger wagged, and you should have, stretched the horse down more at the beginning, and you didn't do enough of a cool out, and there was too much trot work, and you worked too long without a break, or, the admonishments that maybe happened a couple months ago, then I thought, okay, well, those criticisms and observations that I had like 2 months ago, well, I don't want to have those corrections this time. So I'm incorporating that. So it really, he kind of trained me to not need the, moment by moment lesson.
Yeah, and to really create like a thinking rider.
Yeah.
Which is the goal. Yeah.
Yeah. Which and I do that with Frances, and she's like, are you going to say anything about my ride today? And I'm like, looks good. Keep going. I'm like, wasn't it fantastic? I'm like, yes, and therefore I don't need to say anything.
Yeah.
If I needed to
say goal.
Yeah, if it were really bad, then you'd be hearing from me. Right. I'd be interrupting you. Wait 1 minute. So that's kind of a interesting, for somebody who likes to talk a lot, like me, I really like to talk a lot. It's been a hard thing to learn to just, zip it. Yeah.
Agreed. Me too. Yep. Well, this was great. Thank you so much for being here and being such a great teacher, person, man, everything. It's just, tell Frances I said hi.
I will.
And I'm sure we will get something sorted out with more ideas in the academy to have you come in, and I'm excited because we can just make it however we want.
Yeah.
So that's fun.
This was good. I felt sort of connected, and that's a good thing. And that's a good thing about Zoom and the silver lining of coronavirus.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for having me.